first thing I did was tape 6 pieces of blank paper together and drew and then cut out the shape of Texas. This would be my template for the whole box. So if you have all your contents for the box, now would be a great time to see if it all fits. If not, start again and make it larger. Next, figure out the best way to divide the box up. Once you figure that out, cut your template into the sections you selected. Measure each of your cut selections and cut 2 corresponding pieces of wood to fit that piece of template. Cut one piece and stack the other. Length is really not important here as long as your template fits inside all the boundaries of the pieces cut. For the top part straightaways, I will cut one piece for each and just set them on their sides. Once you have all your straightaway pieces cut, take them to the table saw and cut the ends at 45 degrees like you are making a picture frame. Take 2 pieces of your wood and place together and set your fence on the table saw. Once you begin stacking and gluing your wood together, this will be the standard width of the first 2 layers of your box. You will need to cut your straightaway pieces to this height. If you have done this correctly, you can take 2 pieces and stack them, and they should equal the height of the straightaway pieces as shown here. Now take your first piece of the template and lay it on your cut board and trace out the piece with a pencil. Okay, this is very important. While you're doing this, make an X on the side that is the inside of the piece. Apply some wood glue and spread out as thinly as possible. Clamp together very tight and allow to dry. Cut the end pencil markings with a miter saw to ensure your angles are straight. Now to cut the shape. It is very important to look for your X and only cut away the inside of the piece. Okay, I understand that your average do-it-yourselfer does not own a bandsaw, so after this piece, I will cut all remaining pieces with a jigsaw. You can now start repeating this process until you have all your sides glued and drying. Set your first cut piece in place. Notice that only the inside of the shape is cut. Now, after another piece is dried, you can cut the corresponding template and apply the markings. On the first pass, I used a pencil. Then I went back and used a Sharpie so I could see the lines a little better. It made it a little easier to cut, and this time you will be able to easily see the X that I used to mark the inside of the box. The same process here. Use a miter saw to cut the ends so they are flush when we butt them up to each other. When using a bandsaw or a jigsaw, the blade could possibly bend a little, not allowing for a perfectly straight cut. Then cut out the marked side. Oh, sorry, I thought I was supposed to use a jigsaw here. To make sure my joints were completely flush, I went back to the straightaway pieces and used a ruler and held it flush to one side. Then I moved my piece until it was right at the starting point of the line, and I drew out my line. Then I simply took it to the miter saw and made my cut. I know this is a repeat of the same thing, but I wanted to show you that with a wider board you can create less joints. With the thin boards, this piece would have taken 2 joints. So I went with a wider board here that would encompass all the bends. The only drawback to this is the wider boards are more expensive. I would not recommend this, but on some of the straight lines you can use your table saw. I only did this because I know mahogany is very hard wood and it will dull my jigsaw blades after a while. Remember, we are still only cutting the inside of the frame, so look for your X. Also, make a cheater's mark on your table saw so you do not cut too far underneath where you can't see. Most people make this mistake because they get caught up looking at the wood being cut and forget that the table saw blade extends below and cuts lower first. I used the end of my fence guide as a mark. With the top of the blade, it doesn't look like you have cut much, but when you flip it over, you can see that you are almost to the end. The standard jigsaw blade is not long enough to make the cut through 2 pieces, so here I swap out the standard blade for a 7-inch blade. This is a rough cut blade. You will need this to get through the hard mahogany. Raise your two previously cut pieces and slide this piece under before you make your end cuts. Discount double check that you do not need to adjust your lines before making your cut. Notice we have still only cut the inside of the frame. I recommend using a miter saw to cut your ends, but here I show you that you can use a table saw as well. As we glance around the frame, notice that we have only cut the inside of the frame. Now let's knock out that last joint. Okay, for the last piece, as you guessed it, it's the same process. Take your time and ensure you get a good fit. Then we can move on to the fun part of mounting them all together. Break out your hole pocket jig and drill some pocket holes at the end of your joints so we can tightly screw them together. Do this all the way around your frame until all the pieces of your frame are connected. Although we have connected all of the frame joints together, this is not permanent, because later we will apply wood glue and reset our screws. Now that you have ensured that everything fits snugly with your frame, take your screws back out and take all the pieces to the sanding board. Sand the easy to reach spots with an orbital sander and then use whatever it takes to get into the tight spots. Screw your frame back together and lay on a 1/4 inch piece of plywood. With a pencil, we will now trace out your back plate. Repeat this process for your plexiglass, but use a Sharpie instead of a pencil. Now we will start on the third layer. Find a piece of wood with the best grain. Look for dark patterns that will stand out once stained. What I'm going to do here is lay out the wood continuously in the same direction and cut enough of it to fit over the first 2 layers of the frame. Just keep repeating this process until all of your frame is covered. Now that all the pieces are cut, mark the positions of each piece with a pencil so you can easily flip it over and realign the pieces while they're upside down. Next, take your frame and flip it upside down and allow yourself at least an inch buffer from the inside hole. Then trace out your frame with a pencil. Take your pieces to a solid, hard surface and reassemble them, still leaving them upside down. You can do this next step in any number of fashions, but the easiest for me is to take a thin piece of scrap wood and cut a 1-inch round circle. Here I use a hole saw and just press out the circle. Then I switch out the bit and place a small hole in the center of the circle. Take your circle and a pencil and run the perimeter of your circle around the inside of your frame. This should give you an even 1/2 inch lip all the way around your third layer, or as I will call from this point on, our faceplate. If your pencil tip hits the hole in the center of the faceplate, reposition your frame and try again, ensuring you have enough space. Now go back and take a Sharpie and retrace your lines. You should have the perimeter of the box as your first line, and then the lip you just created with the circle. Once complete, write the word lip in between your 2 lines. Using the same process as we did to join the lower frame, we are going to drill our pockets for the faceplate. Align your faceplate and drill your pockets. On the opposite side of each pocket, place an X so you don't end up drilling the pockets toward each other. Continue this process all the way around your frame and try to stay as close to the lip as possible. And it's okay if you go into the lip, just don't go too far away from the lip. Take your pre-cut circle back to the back plate and follow the line you drew previously when the frame was sitting on it. This time you will be going around the outside of the line, not the inside. This will make your back plate a 1/2 of an inch larger than it originally was. Now going back to your faceplate, decide what 2 pieces you are going to cut first and then screw them together. This will give you a seamless transition between the 2 separate boards when you are cutting. Now simply cut out the inside of each joined piece. Do not cut out the outside of the pieces. Leave the outside intact. Unscrew the previously cut pieces to make the piece you are working on smaller and more manageable. Repeat this process until the entire center of the faceplate is cut out. Now glue the pieces, reset your screws, and take some clamps and squeeze together. Wipe away any glue as it squeezes out of your seams. After all your pieces are glued and screwed back together, you can let it sit and dry for a while. At this time, you can go back and unscrew your base frame. Apply glue to each surface. Make sure all of the wood is covered with glue and wipe off any excess. Then tightly reattach your screws. The only joint that was too small for a screw, I had simply placed 2 brads in to hold while the glue was drying. After your frame is dried, give it a light sanding to make sure the top is flush and there will be no imperfections between the faceplate and the frame. Repeat this process on the underside of the faceplate, taking extra time to make sure all joints are completely smooth. Now you need to collect as many clamps as possible. Let me stress that you cannot have too many clamps for this next step. If you need to walk over to your neighbors to borrow a few more, do it right now. You don't want to realize you could use a few more before you start this next step. Your next step is to attach the faceplate to the frame. With the faceplate upside down, place a bead of glue around the perimeter of your faceplate. Then take your frame and align it with the previously drawn line that represents your frame perimeter. Now start clamping. Clamp your faceplate to the frame. Don't go too tight yet. After you have all your clamps applied, then clockwise slowly crank each clamp a little tighter. All the glue that squeezed out onto the underside of the faceplate lip simply wipe away. You can use a flathead screwdriver to get it out of the small corners. You don't want to rush this next step, so place your frame in a secure spot and allow ample time to dry. I let mine sit overnight for this phase. Okay, here is a chance to improve on one of my steps. Here you can see that my pocket holes are visible on the bottom side. Had I joined them with pocket holes on the top side, they would have been completely covered by the faceplate. No big deal, but I like perfection. The next day I came out and removed the clamps. This looked good. Before I went any further, I sanded away the pressure spots left by the clamps. Now the fun part. I started cutting away the outside of the faceplate. I started by raising my table saw and cutting the straightaways. Raise your blade all the way past the top of the frame. This way, if you slightly take away more than just the overhanging faceplate, the wood will still remain even and easy to sand. Okay, very important here. Make your stop marks so you do not cut too far with the part of the blade you can't see. The last thing you want to do here is to cut into your faceplate. Most jigsaws cut at a slight angle to make cutting easy and fast. You need to change this setting so your blade is cutting completely vertical. For the rest of your box, you can set your blade to its maximum angle to help you cut through the wood as fast as possible. Leave the box upside down. Jigsaw blades cut on an upward thrust, so doing this will give you a cleaner cut on the other side where your cut will show. Remember to change your blade orientation before you reach the corner. Do a quick cleanup and flip your box over to see how you are progressing. So far so good. We are almost there. Continue this process until the frame is completely cut out. Now it's really starting to look like Texas. Taking 180 grit sandpaper, I use my orbital sander to smooth out the rough edges. Take your time sanding, and remember you can never sand too much. Of all the steps in making this box, I spent the most time on it sanding. I took a small sander and gently rounded the inside of the faceplate. I will leave the outside of the faceplate sharp. For the next step, I will cut the relief for the backplate. Since the backplate is a 1/4 inch thick and a 1/2 inch wider than the inside perimeter of the box, I need to find a corresponding router bit that matches these measurements. I also threw some wood plugs into the pocket holes. Yeah, they didn't match, but this is the backside and no one will ever see them. Before I route the underside of the box, I do a quick sand to ensure the plugs are smooth and nothing will cause an elevation change while routing. Instead of trying to take all of the 1/4 inch off in one pass, I took my time and made 3 passes, slightly increasing the height of my bit on each pass. Mahogany is hard and you don't want any chipping or splintering at this point. You've done too much work, so don't rush it. I took a small piece of scrap wood and routed it each time before the frame. This way I knew exactly how much I was taking off. This also allowed me to compare it to the width of the back plate to let me know when I was flush. Raise your bit each time and continue until you have a perfect route. Remember the little brads that I put in to hold the thin joint? Well, I hit them with the router bit and I got fireworks, so I thought that was pretty cool, so I left it in the video. After your 3 passes, you should have a nice 1/4 inch relief around the inside of your frame. Once that is complete, you can cut out your back plate. Use whatever saw you have that has a fine wood cut bit and cut out your back plate. Remember, you are cutting the outside line, the one that you extended out 1/2 inch. Set your back plate in your lip and make any adjustments necessary if you don't have a perfect fit. Now we are going to make the crossbar for the flag housing. Since Texas is such an awkward shape, I have decided to use an area of the state that most closely resembles a triangle. You can put your flag wherever you want to, but I have decided to place it at the bottom of the state and leave the upper half for all of the contents of the box. This is straightforward. Wherever you decide to place your ensign, just take a measurement from side to side and cut your piece. I cut a 1/4 inch piece of mahogany and cut it to fit. Then I cut my angles based on the curvature of the box. To ensure you have the perfect height for the lateral cut, you will need to take a scrap piece of plexiglass and lay them on the lip. This will give you the perfect height from the lip to allow your cross piece not to extend above the back plate. Then make your marks. Now take it back to the table saw and make your cut. Check to see that your piece does not extend above the back plate lip. To make your life easy, sand the piece thoroughly now before we glue it into place. To cut the correct fit for the foam board, use the plexiglass. I made a mistake here and I used the back plate, which is actually too large. But just trace it out. You get the idea. The foam board is super easy to cut, but it makes a big mess if you use a rough cut blade. If you have a shop vac, hook it up now. It would be a good time to use it. This is where I realized my goof and I should have used the plexiglass, not the back plate. Since the foam board fit perfectly in the back plate lip, it allowed me to flip it over and trace out the inside of the box. Then I just had to take an extra step and cut it out again. I thought I could stain the box and let it dry while I was working on the foam board, so I began sanding again. First I hit the box with 120, then I went down to 100, then I finished with 60. This was looking really smooth, so I was happy. After I got all the nooks and crannies, I decided to stain. Mahogany is dark wood to begin with, so I would try and use a lighter stain that would really show the grain. I chose pecan stain. If you have seen any of my other shadow boxes, you are probably seeing a pattern here. Before you begin, wipe down your box with a paper towel to remove any extra sawdust. Then we can begin staining. As with all my other stain jobs, I have resorted to using paper towels. It makes a lot less mess and clean up a breeze. There is nothing special about the way I stain. I just rub it on. Stain the top, outside, and inside. I did not bother staining any of the back. And while you're at it, don't forget to stain your ensign crossbar. So after the stain dries, I put a thin coat of polyurethane over the stain. This is where your box starts to look like it was professionally made. So while that is drying, let's go back to the foam board and continue on. After I glued my foam board to the back plate, I cut a piece of black felt to fit over the stake. Take a pair of scissors and cut closer to the foam board to make it more manageable. Now using Elmer's glue, I apply a healthy coat to the foam board and smooth out with a piece of plastic. Make sure you don't have any lumps. Make it as smooth as possible. Once you think you are smooth enough, lay your felt onto the glue. Then with your hands, simply rub it down and feel for any lumps. Apply a little pressure here and make sure your felt has contact with the glue. Going back to your scissors, make small relief cuts all around the corners and bends of the foam board. Now we are going to press in the sides of your felt. I used this process on the Air Force Shadow Box for the first time and it worked great, so I will repeat it here. Simply apply a bead of glue at the corner of the foam board and the back plate and press your felt into the glue with the sewing pins. Continue this process until you have completely attached your felt to the sides. Make extra cuts on the felt near the corners and the bends to relieve the tension. Once you have completed that, allow ample time for the glue to dry before you attempt to cut away the excess felt. Now, while the felt is drying, we are going to go back to the frame and attach our plexiglass. Slide the plexiglass into the frame and drill small pilot holes for your screws. You don't want to risk cracking the plexiglass or ripping the heads off your screws when trying to screw them into the mahogany. Once you have your pilot holes drilled, pull back an inch of the plastic protection from the front side of the plexiglass and insert it into the frame. Then, using a screwdriver, insert your screws. Use a screwdriver so you can feel how much tension you are placing on the screw. This will keep you from cracking the plexiglass. Now that your plexiglass is in place, you can attach your ensign divider. Pull back the plastic protection from the plexiglass so you can place the divider directly onto the plexiglass with nothing in between. Apply your wood glue and then tightly clamp into place so you can ensure a solid bond between the wood. On the top side of your crosspiece, make sure you carefully wipe up any excess glue that has squeezed out. It's not so important on the inside since the flag will cover this portion. I have seen many flags folded to perfection and some really sloppy, but a great way to make your flag perfect and professional looking is to cut a thin piece of wood or leftover plexiglass to go behind the first layer of the flag. Here I'm going to use some leftover foam board. I used the bottom of the back plate as a template and I just trimmed off a little more until I had a good fit. Okay, I'm guilty here. I folded the flag up to a certain point and then slid my cut piece under the first layer. Then I pushed the rest of the flag into the space. It's not properly folded. A smaller flag will make your life a lot easier on this step. Just take a look at how your stars align before you commit to a spot. Once pressed into place, the flag looks tight and the stars are exactly where I want them. Then I just kind of taped the back up so it wouldn't keep falling out until I got my back plate in. I went back and trimmed away the excess felt and laid out my contents. Now the recipient of this shadow box is a huge Dallas Cowboy fan if you couldn't already tell. So when he was getting his medals mounted, I asked he get 3, 2, and 5 mounted together. This way I could place a star between the medals to represent the city of Dallas and his favorite football team. Once they were laid out, I simply pressed them into place. Now, before we reassemble the box, we need to attach the hanging brackets. I placed the first one on the top of the state, and then I measured out 16 inches to ensure both nails would be in studs when it was hung. I also placed one more bracket at the bottom of the box, upside down, to ensure it was evenly spaced from the wall and stayed vertical while hung. Before I put this together for the last time, I take some painter's tape and pick up any loose dirt or dust. Now, peel away the plastic protection from the inside of the plexiglass. At this point, your box is done. I tend to leave the protective plastic cover on the box until prime time. Then you don't have to worry about cleaning it before the ceremony. And then my favorite part, the presentation. Remember, this process can be used for any state or shape for that matter. Thanks for watching, and I would love to hear your comments. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button.